This is our last session, our fourth and last session of COVID-19 through the eyes of a child. This session is targeting school agers. The title of it is Breaking Down the Ever-Changing World of School Agers and How to Level It All Out. Denise Folsom is our mental health professional that's been working with us and bringing these fantastic webinars to us. We're thankful for her to be here. We're thankful for what she does to help us with the children that are in our care and in our lives. And Denise, welcome to the webinar today, and I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate everybody who's tuned in today, and we're going to kind of finish off our series. The first series we did was basic brain development, then we went on to infants and toddlers, did preschoolers, and now we're going to do school agers. And so if you need that resource, it's on the Early Learning Coalition page, and they can also give you the links to that. Today, one of the things we wanted to kind of look at is, especially in our area, the Panhandle Bay County area, in the last couple of years, this group of school agers has really been through a lot. We had most of our year terminated after Hurricane Michael. The next year was kind of recovery. Children got back into maybe the same schools, different schools, maybe got back into housing, found some of their friends. And then here this year, definitely been a disruption in, we were in school one day and the next day we're not. Some of them, most of them had to have their possessions, their lockers gone through, packed up by teachers and handed out. They didn't have any kind of a transition for that. And just to look at, just if you think of those small but really significant changes in their life, you don't think that having your locker gone through is a big deal to us, but that is a big deal to a child, you know, of not being able to say goodbye, or to, when we think of, well, these are kids who are online all the time. Yeah, but they don't learn algebra online. They don't learn math online. They don't learn how to write online. And so all of those itty bitty small changes add up to be this just a really changing world for our kids, especially in our area, gone through Hurricane Michael and then now this. So we're going to start a little bit just talking about the negative impact of isolation. So we've all been thrown into isolation, and we're kind of in this bittersweet version of social distancing. And we have seen the creative outlets. We've seen some of the, you know, athletes and Hollywood putting on some shows. We've seen people reach out. Even in my therapy world, the resources that people are sharing have just been stunning. And so that touches your heart. But we also have to realize that there are people, some more than others, who need that absolute human face-to-face connection. And so we're going to talk about just the negative impact of isolation as a whole, but specifically to our school agers. So when you're isolated more and more, it increases just that stress response. Humans are made to have connections. And when we don't have that connection, it increases our stress response and that cortisol level, which is kind of what's your alarm system. So just being isolated from other people, it naturally increases just your anxieties. You're not sleeping as well. You're not going into that restorative sleep, that REM sleep. And it can have one of the most significant impacts on your physical health, more than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure when we're talking about isolation. Definitely puts you at greater risk of suicide. In a little while, we're going to talk a little bit about what that would look like for a teen. Even in this area, we've seen increases in domestic violences. We've seen increase in alcohol and drug use. And just that isolation, it's just because your body is craving something it's not able to have. So it talks about poor self-care. I've been doing a lot of telehealth with my school agers, and I'm noticing anywhere starting about 5th, 6th grade, some of them, my session will be at 3 o'clock, and I am literally waking them up. I don't know when the last time they've had a shower. I don't know when the last time they've brushed their teeth, had a meal with somebody. When you think about all that social and those grooming skills and those expectations that come with going to school, that is not there right now. And it's just really amazing to watch how I've had to go back and talk about self-care to some of my teenage clients. And I have not had either ever had to have that conversation or haven't had it in a while. And we know that lack of self-care can be one of the first signs of depression. So there are reasons that school agers are more vulnerable than other populations for that social isolation. Um, when you think about school agers as a whole, they're beginning to have adult expectations. You know, they begin to take on more responsibility, and there's definitely increased interest in peer relationships. Starts about early teen, and about 14 it hits its peak, but it definitely doesn't drop off until young adult, middle adult. But the issue that comes with it is they actually don't have the brain development to understand that this isn't personal. Even if it is, you know, sometimes it's personal, but let's say somebody's just walks by you and doesn't say hi to you in the hall. Right? When you're 13, 14, 15 years old, it's really hard to understand that's not personal. They may have just been distracted. And then we're going to look at a video in just a few minutes when sometimes it is personal. But adolescents are going to feel that distress, feel more distress than even adults when they're excluded by peers. So I want you to think about, you know, as adults, how you feel the last time that you were really excluded from a group. You at least have some past experiences in dealing with it. And then two, you have a fully functioning brain. When we did brain development, we talked about the last part to develop is that prefrontal cortex, which is the part that helps you in that decision making. And so they have all of the social pressures, they have all the expectations, they have that desire to be included. But when it doesn't go well, they don't have the ability to judge and make a decision on really the level of distress that's appropriate for that interaction. So when you're looking at school agers, this is something I look at, it's kind of an infinity loop. This is their fear of social rejection is just immense. I think in all people it is, but at this age, it's probably their most intense fear. And then when you have that fear, they tend to isolate more. And then when they isolate more, they don't have the experiences to come back in and get into a circle. There's even been a brain imaging study done by the University of Michigan that shows that social rejection, it impacts the brain and it looks just like if somebody was in physical pain. So if you have an adolescent, a teen, you know, a late elementary school, somewhere in there that's been rejected by a peer, it actually in the brain demonstrates as physical pain. And so more and more, even what I'm seeing is they're going to go to social media, they're going to go to online relationships, and they're choosing isolation rather than put themselves in a path that maybe they could be rejected. So even that fear of being rejected puts them in a path of isolation. So naturally in school systems, there's going to be isolation. And now we have just kind of magnified it because we even have physical isolation. This is a video, I'm just going to show about a minute of it. And I want to kind of give you an idea of what some of these kids face with in school.
First day of 6th grade. I'm wearing black jeans, black jacket, black shirt, and eyeliner. I'm walking down the hallway, and one of my friends looks at me funny. She tells me I shouldn't wear any eyeliner. So I say, okay, and she told me not to sit with them at lunch.
The teacher starts talking about how the Americans used to refer to the Japanese immigrants as aliens. I didn't think much of it until I noticed that people were pointing at me and laughing. I've never felt so uncomfortable in my entire life.
Then, one day, I went to sit at my best friend's table for lunch. When I sat down, my best friend said to me, "Hey, why are you sitting here?"
Lunch is far too long and filled with too much time where there is nothing to do. Everyone else is in groups that I do not have the courage to approach. They have succeeded where I have failed. They are together. I am alone. But I can't be seen just standing here by myself because that is the kiss of death. The more alone you are, the more alone you're going to be.
So the link to this will be in the PowerPoint. But what I really wanted you to look at is just how that feels. And that happens every day in school systems. Some of it is a perception issue where they'll walk into a room and the other people or the other kids, the other school agers are just absorbed in their own world. And some of it is straight out the truth. And these are instances that happen with people they already knew, they already had relationships with. And so for some of them, they have no idea what just happened. And for others, it's something that's being discussed online. It's being discussed on Twitter and on Snapchat. There's these conversations going on that they have no idea. And one of the reasons that I wanted to put in this is to talk about now these conversations are going on and they're not able to be in a school environment to judge it. They're not able to sit in a class and go, why didn't my friend talk to me? They're not able to say, oh, that person walked by me in the hall and didn't say anything. They're not able to see, I think they're laughing at me. So even if the perception's right or wrong, right now with this isolation, they're not able to even use some of their gut instincts, some of their social skills that they have already accomplished to see, am I at risk? Now these conversations, and it's something that I'm seeing even more and more in therapy, these conversations are happening and they're not able to even see it coming. When I was in school, now I'm 52, I have no problem telling people my age. It's a very different world for me. When I left school, I either had to be on the phone, which is tied to a wall, or actually with people. And on the phone, I could talk to one, and then I remember I thought it was a big deal when we could have two people on the same phone, but we were still tied to the wall. And what my teens and what my school agers are talking, and I'm hitting about 5th grade on up, this is what I'm seeing in therapy, is that they don't have the break. When I walked off the school property, pretty much I had a break from all of this pressure and I had a break from all of this stress. These kids truly believe if they don't stay on social media at all times, that there's going to be repercussions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so when you think about the video that we just looked at, it's going to show you just this first bullet kind of just nails it, that they may choose to withdraw after a traumatic social experience or a breakup. So just based on what you saw in that video, will you think about how those kids are going to respond in 5 minutes, in 20 minutes? What is that going to tell them about social anxiety or their social skills? So do they now have social anxiety? Social anxiety can begin after one of these kind of traumatic social experiences or a breakup, because what they thought was true, what their perception is not. And then sometimes children just don't have those social skills to be able to get into a group. And then the isolation makes them lonelier. And it's the most common in school age. It peaks in adolescence and young adults. And so we're looking at, when you start elementary school, that's what I call forced friendships. You tend to be friends with the kids in your class. Those are the kids that you get to know. Those are the kids you sit beside at lunch. There's not really a dramatic shift until middle school and they start to switch classes. Then they have to have the social skills. They have to have the confidence. They have to have those abilities to be able to make friends in a 45-minute span. And then guess what? Then they're going to change and have to start all over. And while all of this is going on, their brain is not developed enough to have, the appropriate perspective, good decision making. They're going to make poor choices. They're going to act in just what what feels good. They need that immediate feedback. And so that is also going to influence it. And so when you're looking at it, you're going to begin to see some unhealthy physical and psychological symptoms. You're going to begin to see signs of depression. And one of the reasons that they're more vulnerable, And it helps to get that the mental health problems and social isolation are at epidemic levels right now. And, we look at it in my generation is that I hear from adults and parents a lot that they're sensitive, that they don't have the ability to tolerate. And one of the things I see in school agers is they get confused because it feels the same in their body from uncomfortable and dangerous. They get those two things confused. One, I've noticed that a lot of parents don't want their children to be uncomfortable. They don't want them to go through things. We try to protect them, and which is a wonderful thing for a parent to do. However, then they don't know what to do when they're uncomfortable. They don't know that they can learn new skills, that they can push through. They don't know that these things are survivable. And when you have the constant pressure of social media on there, then it makes a big difference on really what they can tolerate. And so when they try to kind of armor up, I call it turtling, they just kind of go in their shell, then that increased desire, increased use of social media, you would think that that would help alleviate feelings of social isolation, but it actually makes them feel more comfortable in those what they call safer relationships. And because that feeds just a little bit of their need, they don't have that craving for in-person. And one of the things with social media, I actually call Facebook fake book, because we put out there what we want other people to see. You're not going to put on Snapchat, Instagram, any of those things that are really those damaging moments. We're going to put out what looks like that we are leading a happier life than we are. And then we have other people who are trying to live up to what they see. When you look at just the filters that are available for a photo, then how much, that's the reason, we see those selfies is they do it. And then they take, I think the average is like between 20 and 30 selfies before one is ever published. So that's that pressure of getting that perfect picture of wearing the right shirt. And that's just that social media, which right now is is the most that they are communicating with anybody. That is the way that connection is happening now, through social media. And then there's a filter of what it needs to be perfect and what that expectation is. And we all know, that what they're trying to live up to is not real. So just to give you some statistics about social media, 20% of children has a phone by the age of 8. 53% of children in the US owns a smartphone by the age of 11, and 84% of teenagers have their own phone. So this is one of those things that now it's in their face, it's in their pocket, they sleep with it. It is attached to them at all times. They feel this constant desire to have it, but we know what's coming across that screen is full of pressure and unrealistic expectations. So I went through and just looked up some of the things. There are very, very, especially right now, many examples. It's a lot of examples of the positive things of social media. We're seeing people reach out when they hadn't. You're going to see some of the online ways that people are helping each other and reaching out, and even helping designate the graduates for this year. They're kind of having a hard time. And so we definitely want to honor the ones that have made a difference. When it gets to some resources for suicide, I want you guys to really look at some of those are online, because we have to meet these kids where they are. If they feel comfortable texting, if they feel comfortable doing things that way, then we have to be able to meet them in their most vulnerable times in a way that they're comfortable. So I definitely appreciate the positives of social media, but I wanted you to really kind of look at what has just happened to these kids. So some of the negative effects of social media, definitely depression and anxiety. So I want you to think about, why would depression come from social media? And I've talked about several of them. Those unrealistic expectations that you're seeing people, just what they want to put out there, that how many likes something gets, how many friends people have, how many times their things are shared. And just all of the things that are being talked about, can they have those things? Can they not have those things? You know, are those things really even realistic? And the anxiety is definitely increased in the last month because they do not know what's being said about them. Some of them are trying to learn online and they can't, and there'll be people online talking about how much they love being in home and doing school. Some of them are saying how easy this is. So they're hearing all of these things that maybe in a classroom setting, even homeschoolers, they have some that support in there. So all of the networks that we have. I have a lot of friends that are homeschooled, and even my homeschool friends, they're not able to go meet up with other homeschoolers. And so this isn't just necessarily a school system issue. When you look at cyberbullying, things can be said about someone and they may never get to know what's being said. And it does not have to be true. You know, we've seen even in our area, you know, we've had a couple children in the last couple of years commit suicide basically because of what was being said to them online. And they have that anonymity. We can make an account that doesn't even represent us and say some things that maybe we wouldn't say in public or to somebody's face. And so that gives the bully some anonymity, and it gives the person who's being bullied, it doesn't even have to be true. They really don't have a way of getting it back out there and fighting against it, because once it's out there, it's out there. We see a lot of, right now, I see a lot of fear of missing out. I have 2 college-age children down in Orlando, and they have pretty much, as far as I know, been staying in their house. They've had the Walmart pickup for delivery. They have, you know, really tried to respect that, mainly because they had a severely ill grandmother who they were, you know, worried about getting this. And they are watching all of the postings about their friends, you know, 10 and 15 of them on a beach, going places, doing things. And my daughter actually said, she said, it's so hard to watch that. It's so hard to watch that and no, I can't do that. And so while I respected, you know, her wanting to honor her grandmother and not go out, it's still really hard to see that she can't participate and do what her friends are doing because she's doing the right thing. We talked a little bit about unrealistic expectations of what people's life is like. And then one of the biggest things in boys and girls that I'm seeing is a negative body image just because of the filters. You know, you can go to a school and you see that, and that used to be your expectation. You see, you know, people in malls, you know, around here, Pier Park, in churches and gatherings, and we have that face-to-face expectation. But right now that's been limited. And so we're seeing all of these cropped and adjusted and modified pictures. And that's a piece that's been really difficult. Some of my girls have really had a hard time, and I'm noticing even their self-care go down. Unhealthy sleep patterns, talked about that just a few minutes ago, where I am waking people up for a 3 o'clock appointment. And, you know, you think of what the parents are dealing with. Some of them, it's okay these children are sleeping longer because they're trying to work from home. They're trying to get these things done. And then the parents are being faced with trying to do schoolwork they haven't done in 15, 20 years. I'll tell you, honestly, I got probably 6th, 7th grade to where I couldn't help my children with their math. And so that's the piece, you know, that some of the parents aren't getting a pattern and getting a routine and a schedule in there just because they're all in survival modes. And then general addiction, it's one of the things, not only online addictions that I'm seeing, just a general kind of addictive behaviors, because anytime something disturbing comes up, anytime they're challenged, they have the ability to go soothe themselves immediately with something online. And they don't know how to be uncomfortable. So they're what we've called their window of tolerance begins to close, that they can tolerate less and less. And these children who are even having difficulty in school, I'm noticing they're not even coming out of their room. And that's acceptable right now because we really can't come out of our homes. But that's becoming more and more comfortable for these children. And my concern is when we can go back, what happens to them? You know, we naturally have our introverts and our extroverts, and our introverts are initially loving this. But my concern is what happens when we have children who are more introverted, who are more sensitive to their environment, or who have become just too comfortable in their rooms and on just their small worlds they created. What happens when we expect them to go back? So just some facts about school agers I thought I'd share is, and this was in 2019, 42 million adolescents between the ages of 10 to 19. And they make up about almost 13% of our population. But I want you to look at the suicide rate. When you look at this is the highest since 2000. And so it's particularly strong in teen boys, and it's about 14% a year. And then the suicide rate for teenage girls rose about 8% in from 2000 to 2017. And in talking to the teens who come in here, school age, I'm hearing some version of self-harm or I'm going to kill myself, those words, as early as 7 and 8. Some of them don't know what it means. Some of them very clearly know what it means. I've had some 8-year-olds tell me their plan, and as an adult, that plan doesn't make sense. But it's a piece of how did we get there? How did we get to those words? So it's definitely a piece that we have to pay attention to and actually be able to talk about. So I wanted to give you just some basics to think about. And you're going to see some children naturally have these things. I worked in an active duty military unit for a number of years. And when we were talking about suicide with them, some of them would get happy because they had finally decided. They had decided to end the pain. So sometimes you're going to have just a difference in behaviors, not necessarily these things. So I wanted you kind of to pay attention to when do you see a change in a behavior. Some children are naturally more isolative, so it doesn't mean just because they're isolating that they're suicidal. And you'll see most of the time, not always. You'll see a change, but it really is in their world. It's in their conversation. Self-harm is part of their vocabulary. When I was growing up, suicide was actually in my world, it was very rare. And because I didn't have social media, I actually wasn't exposed to just the concept of suicide. So these are just some of the warning signs to look at. Talking or writing about suicide. One of the things we talk about with therapists is when I have an intern is talking about suicide with somebody who's talking about it does not make it more likely. So it's not that it's subject to avoid. It's something to either educate, get comfortable, get some resources, reach out to some people. And I'm going to give you some resources in just a little bit. But if you're hearing it, it's definitely something you need to pay attention to. Withdrawing from social contact. I love this next one, experiencing sudden mood swings. And I know you probably just said, well, that's the definition of a teenager, of a school ager. And that's true. For me, dealing with the teens, I see a change. I see just a difference, and sometimes it's subtle. Had they begun to use alcohol and drugs more frequently? Is this a change for them? Sometimes you'll see a sense of hopelessness, and it's just a little different. In my kids that I deal with, there's just a little shift. They also tend to be very guarded about these subjects, and so it's one of the things that for me as a therapist, when they come in here, I have to pay a little bit more attention to. Sometimes you'll see risky and self-destructive behaviors increase, doing more dangerous things. Now, just as I mentioned before, that prefrontal cortex isn't developed, so risky behaviors can be a definition of teenagers, but it's just, sometimes you'll just see, I tell parents to trust their gut, and we're going to talk a little bit about what to do if that gut of yours kind of goes off. You're going to see the changing in eating and sleeping patterns, but for most of ours, because of COVID, that's all of them. And then giving away belongings for no apparent reason. I had a young military person who came in his uniform because he had given away everything. He was completely decided that he was going to end his own life. And when he came in, we actually went and bought him clothes because the only thing he had was the uniform on his back. He had given away absolutely everything. So I put in here, so we'll make these things available to you. We talked a little bit about if you have a concern, trying to make it easier for them in speaking their language. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what to do if you have some suspicions, and then talk to you about what to do just to help the connections for teenagers in general a little bit later. So one of the things that they have a crisis text, and I put the link in here. And so it's with teens, it's more, it's usually more comfortable for them to text. Even my children, before they call me, they text me, "Can I call?" And I always think that's kind of funny. I guess it's just a family thing. But they may be more inclined to share, to say, to talk about those things that are important to them. So there actually is a crisis text line. There's a Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide that you can find information, also that you can send teens to, and then also give you some ideas on how to cope if a friend dies by suicide. Sometimes going and finding information online is a little bit more comfortable for them. And then also there's a link called the Trevor Project, and it's going to give you some prevention and some intervention services for specific communities, and they're going to offer some free 24/7. So it's called the Trevor Project. So that's one of the things that you can start a text and have a chat, even instant messaging, just through the Trevor Project. Locally in our Panama City, Bay County, Panhandle area, these are your two primary resources for school agers and what we call Baker Acts. There's Emerald Coast Behavior Hospital, so I've given you the number there, and then Life Management Center. Those are the two primary Baker Act receiving facilities in our area. What I typically suggest is to actually call 911 first. I've had a couple teens who agreed to go to a Baker Act receiving facility, and the travel and the trip there did not go as planned. And so if you're really concerned and you're seeing these things, I actually would say call 911 and go to an emergency room. But these are the two just local Baker Act receiving facilities. So the positive part of this, we've talked a little bit about in the preschool one, where we talked about resiliency factors. And resiliency factors are basically, do I have that person in my life? So when we're talking about the teens and all the things that they're going through, they are going to be hesitant about beginning new connections. This is uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to respond. Some of these parents have been working and now they're home. Even teachers are trying to talk online. I'm even doing most of my sessions telehealth. And even for me, that's such a painful thing because I'm so used to body language and I'm so used to that person being here, and I'm so used to being able to do activities with them and go into the playroom. Even for teens, we do mask making, we do art, and trying to do all that through telehealth, even on my end, has been difficult. And I know that they sense it, and so we talk about that. But the power of absolute connection, finding those people, and it can be in little minute sections. It can be a 3 or 4 minute conversation or connection. My son came home this weekend. He was home for Mother's Day. And just in the week that he was here, I'll notice he'll come and he'll sit closer. He'll come and he finally got taller than I am, and he'll lift me up and joke about, that I'm short. And so I'm watching him crave just those connections. My daughter, who was coming home from college and spending, the whole 4 minutes while she drops her bag and going back off, has just needed to be close. And so when you're able to have this physical time, this one-on-one, and even if you're doing it online, we're looking for that power of connection. And so this is, if you want to look at the realistic, really kind of concrete reasons to promote connection in your relationships, especially with school agers, you actually increase their immune system. When children are connected to others, it reduces the stress, anxiety levels, and it increases their immune system. So of all the times to have a good immune system, this whole COVID stuff is definitely one of the times we're going to look at how do I improve that connection in order to improve that immune system. They have better self-esteem. Clearly it reduces the rates of anxiety, depression. All the things we talked about before, you're seeing the connection will kind of put a barrier in there. They're going to be happier and they're going to be optimistic. They're going to have a longer life expectancy simply because their stress level goes down, simply because they're going to look forward to things. They're going to have some hope. It improves their cognitive function. I think right now you ask the teachers around, you'll see these children who are really having a hard time finishing tasks. I have an honor roll student who was trying to do the work online. She's been A and B student her whole life, tried to do it online, could not do it. It's gotten more and more frustrating for her. She's gone to the paperless and it is still not working. So you have to think about what happened, what changed for her that she simply cannot do this work now when she always could. And so you're looking at the power of connection. We've actually connected her back to her favorite teacher, and they've been able to have some sessions online, just if nothing else, to get some consistency and some connection. And when children have connection, when they see a violation of a connection, when they see bullying, when they see things like that, they're much more apt to have empathy and then feelings of trust towards others. So when you have that, then you can build more connections. So one of the things to really begin to look at when we do preschool, when we do childcare, infants and toddlers, we talk about teachable moments a lot. And we think when they hit elementary, middle school, and high school that shouldn't apply, but it probably applies even more. And when we're talking about teachable moments, it's really clear not to look at lecturable moments. Not everything has to be a lesson. We're looking for teachable for, hey, I can connect with you. Teachable for, hey, you can trust me. Hey, it's okay to have moments of silly, and it's okay to have moments of tender and soft. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about teachable moments here, and to look for those times. If you're child care center staff and you're going to have those people, the kids coming back into your center, look for those moments to make eye contact. Look for the bumping of the elbow, looking for a way to push them on a swing. Look for times that you just say, hey, I know this is your favorite book. One of the things we talk about with interns as they become therapists is to simply say, hey, I was thinking about you, after the last session. So it's simply those ways to make those connections and choosing your moment. So everyday situations in just a very natural way. And talking about, sometimes it's in the car if you're a parent. I probably had some of the best conversations I've ever had with my kids when we're on road trips, taking them to school in those everyday moments. It was kind of withdrawal for me when they learned how to drive. I was excited, but not excited. And so remember, you're not going to be teaching a lesson, or you're not going to be doing those things. Any of when we talk about teachable, we're talking about teaching that there's a possibility of a connection. Your goal is to simply have a conversation, and remembering that not everything has to be started. There doesn't have to be a beginning, middle, and end to these conversations. Sometimes it's going to be bits and pieces. So just to give you some ideas on if you've never dealt with school agers, when you're dealing with a 3-4-year-old and then you have a 9-10-year-old, then that's a very different conversation. And then to have a conversation with a 16-year-old, my conversations with my son when he was in high school, I would say, how was your day? And all right, what's the answer? Good. Fine. Good. That's pretty much was it. And so we had to ban those 2 words in my house, and he had to give me more than fine or good. And so he would say excellent minus okay. And yeah, that's my son. So we have to think about just those ways to have those conversations. And initially they may seem uncomfortable, they may seem awkward, but that's kind of what we want, is that most relationships, most connections start awkward. they start uncomfortable. And as you get used to the uncomfortable, you're going to begin to build that relationship. And so it's not a bad thing if you're the people, the adults in their life to start it. So look at the scenes from a movie, a TV show, song lyrics, news stories. My oldest daughter loves anime, loves cosplay, and I've learned more about Bleach and all of those things. And so I listen, and sometimes I don't understand anything that she's saying, but I catch keywords, and I try to remember to go back to that later. And I'll say, hey, how's that costume going? Or what happened to your cosplay convention? Talk about her Bleach characteristic characters. Most of them I can't pronounce their name, but I work on it, and then she laughs at me. So a good way is to simply say, what do you think about that? And that can be all of these things that are going on. What do you think about these kids who are going out to the beach? You know, what do you think about the people in the nursing homes who seem to be more at risk? Talking about teen relationships, they will share YouTube videos with you. They will share all of those things with you if you learn to speak a little bit of their language. And so you're probably going to get the, I don't know. That's the most frequent words I hear from my son. I don't know. And then I'll kind of say, well, let me tell you what I think. And so I try not to lecture. Sometimes I try to sneak in a lesson or two, but mainly it's just getting a jumping off point. And right now with the COVID and what's going on with summer and how to get work, I've noticed my son finally got another job after this COVID, and he's delivering food, and just saying, hey, where did you go? And what did you pick up? And, you know, did you get a tip? And what were they like? And what are you seeing? And all of that. It's in those moments between those conversations that I get the good stuff. And so remember that we're looking at connection, not necessarily lesson. And so we're going to talk for a few minutes, and we're going to leave some time at the end if you guys have any questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and send them in, and then the coalition staff will talk about them in just a minute. So I'll give you a minute to think about some questions if you'd like to put them through. But here's just some tips. One is, in that moment, start with a clean slate. I know for me, I have messed up with my kids. I think the biggest lesson that I learned, it's okay to apologize. And Donna and I were talking about it before we started recording, that the biggest lesson that I learned as a therapist is it's not what I do, it's what I do after what I did. And that's been true for me as a parent. It's been true for me as a therapist, that about 30% of the time I get it right. And then the rest of the time I'm doing what therapists call making a repair. But the repair can be probably the most influential in a relationship and a connection when you think of that's what they're going to do as well. They're going to mess up, and they need to see what it's like to make a repair, to do something about that connection, how to make it better, rather than just that uncomfortableness that they have in that relationship, making them walk away from every friendship. So you're going to be a beautiful role model of that. It's not what you do, it's what you do after what you did. And that can be probably a significant change in a relationship, especially with adolescents. So beating yourself up over the choices you've already made, that's not going to help them. Sometimes, you know, you can't go back and fix it, but you're going to say, okay, I know that, what am I going to do differently from here? And look at the expectations. You know, we really need to think that we are having some really high expectations for children who did not grow up in our world, who grew up in a world of social media, who grew up in a world of completely different expectations. They have words that I don't know. I'm learning all kinds of things. And when I have my teens, I always tell them in session to teach me something I didn't know. But to remember that that expectation of these children, you're expecting something they don't have the brain development to carry off. Their brain doesn't fully develop until like 25, 26. My oldest daughter is 23, so we're almost there. One of the other things is to really pay attention to is respectful listening. Are you really, truly listening? If you think of somebody who was a mentor in your life or somebody that's really important, what would happen if you listened to them how you listen to our teens, to our school agers? What would that look like? So that's one of the things to look back and simply say back, hey, you're a little worried about that test. You're worried about that PE class tomorrow. You're going to hear some things that may surprise you. And so stay calm. You can go on a lot of really good apps and learn breathing techniques. I do express a minute regularly when I'm talking to all 3 of my college students and to my children. And so I breathe a lot. And so think about that relationship, and that connection is really what the goal is. It's going to talk about shaming, focus on, the behavior. So avoid the shaming that's in there. And so we're going to go through, and one of the best things I'm going to push this, and we're going to see if we have any questions, is share some of your stories. Share what you did as a teenager, especially when you mess up. I've shared some with my girls about, my first boyfriends and things that happened to me and what I thought and my expectations. And so it's a piece to kind of play with and think about what situations and what stories that you really would like to share with them, and they can see you as that human. I remember leaving middle school one time, and the most popular girl in the school came up to me and asked if she could go home with me. And I was so excited. And, when we arranged that to happen, she actually, it was under false pretenses, and she wanted to go ride my horse. And then after she rode my horse, she was never nice to me again. And so I talked to them about that experience and what that felt like. And she kind of was even worse after we went back. And so that's that piece to talk about those struggles that you went through and what you would do. So Donna sent me a message just a minute ago that there aren't any questions. And so I'm going to share with you that when you have access to this PowerPoint, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but I wanted you to have a good resource on what it's going to look like when we have school agers. So you're going to be able to process through these screens and press right through. And it talks about characteristics of a middle childhood, which is 6 to 8. A little bit more of that. Then it's going to talk about middle childhood 9 to 11. It's going to talk about the increase in independence, the more important that friends and peers become, and how they need to gain responsibility. So that's going to be on this one. Some young teens, we have to remember when they're hitting between 12 and 14, some girls, I have a 10-year-old young lady who has started puberty. So these ages can vary from child to child, but you're going to begin to see those changes as well. And so we want to pay attention to, not only are you dealing with somebody whose brain's not fully developed, they have constant social media pressure. Now we add hormones. And so part of that, I think we need to take into consideration. Donna, I wanted to see, do you have any questions yet, or did you want me to continue?
All right, Denise, we do have a question. Can you explain what Baker's Act is for people who don't know?
Yes. So if a parent or a teacher or anyone has a concern that somebody is going to be a harm to themselves or someone else, you can actually call 911. You can take them to the emergency room. And what that will do is, a Baker Act receiving facility has the staff to do an assessment for a Baker Act. And Baker Act is, they are allowed to hold that person for assessment for 72 hours. When I was working at Emerald Coast Behavior Hospital, we would even have active duty that somebody would have started the process of a Baker Act. And so they can be held for up to 72 hours before it goes before a judge. And that's if you're concerned that somebody is a danger to themselves or someone else. It kind of takes the pressure off of a parent for knowing, or a teacher. And if you're not sure, it really is an assessment that's done by a licensed mental health counselor, therapist, social worker, or a medical professional to determine, okay, is this somebody that's, are they actually a danger to themselves or someone else? That way the pressure is kind of taken off of a parent or an adult it's made into more of a professional hands on whether they can hold them for up to 72 hours. Then it will go before a judge to see if you can hold them longer and what's in their best interest.
Okay, that's all. That was the only question, Denise, if you wanted
Okay.
to go to your next slide.
So each of these slides, as you go through, is just going to talk about the things that they become more concerned about. You're going to have maybe more moodiness and things like that. So each one of these is going to go through characteristics. One of the things that I wanted to go back to is that if you're looking at that video, there was an organization that it might be good if you'll see it called Beyond Differences. If you want some pretty good videos, to maybe some talking points to look at with teens, this is probably a good place to go and talk about what would you do and what would you say, and has this ever happened to you? There are a lot of really good sources out there on social media, some TED Talks that can really kind of help you bring up some difficult conversations.
All right, Denise, I don't know if I've lost the PowerPoint slide or not, but I'm not seeing it. But that's okay. I know we're towards the end. We do have another question.
Okay.
The question is from a Bay County person. It says, do we have beds for young people in Bay County? Kids have been sent to Tallahassee and even Daytona Beach because we have no room here in Bay County. Do you know that?
I know that the adolescent unit at Emerald Coast Behavioral Hospital is functioning again. The beds will determine by the number of, they have a capacity. So when they're at capacity, that can be when they're being sent to Tallahassee. I know after the hurricane, Emerald Coast was out of functioning for almost a year, I believe. I know their military unit, they were hoping to get it up. So I know that Emerald Coast is accepting adolescents. There is also an adolescent outpatient at Emerald Coast. And the only reason I can speak to that is because I used to work there and I refer to them pretty regularly. So they are, as far as I know, there are beds available on the adolescent unit. The only reason that I know you would not be able to go there is if maybe they were at capacity. And then I know that, so yes, in Bay County, there are some. And then also if they don't need that level of care, they do have an adolescent outpatient groups that meet during the week. Used to be 3 to 6, and that can be a piece that I can check on for you if you need more information about that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions in the chat box, but I have a question myself. I asked on the beginning in infant and toddler, when we started with that, what does infant and toddler look like in play therapy, which is what you specialize in? Now I'm going to ask you, what does adolescence look like in play therapy?
For me, I'm very hands-on. So I have a sand tray room, which has sand. It has a water table. We make slime. I do a lot of masks. We'll make a mask about how they feel on the inside versus the outside. I do a lot of art with them. I am going to be, there will be a therapeutic gaming group starting pretty soon, using kind of role play. Role play tends to give them a little bit more courage and saying who they really are. We play Jenga. We do all kinds of things with the teens. I noticed that, expecting them to look at me face to face, normally it doesn't happen. I don't get a lot of conversation. But like my Jenga game has colors on the end of the blocks and it has numbers, and those colors and numbers are associated with questions. And so if they pull it, then they get to ask a question. And then when I pull it, I get to ask them a question. So it's any way that I can get them to have those conversations. Like I said, we've done slime. I have stones that have emotions. We've buried them in the slime. We've done role plays on what it would be like to have, any of these social situations. If they don't know what to do and they don't know what they should say in their response, we've done that. There are even therapeutic book clubs where you're reading a book that would fit, teens, and it's something that they get together and do. Most of the groups have been on hold because of COVID, but they should be starting back up.
Very interesting. Thank you, Denise. Very interesting. I don't have any more questions in the question and answer box or in the chat box. So we're going to, I guess, call this the end of our sessions of COVID-19 through the eyes of a child. I think we went from brain development to infant and toddler to preschool and adolescence and school agers. So thank you very much, Denise. I've learned very, very much today, and I just think this is more information than my brain can handle some days. So if that's the case, there's an option to go back and retrieve this information. We'll be putting it out on our website under our COVID-19 tab, and it is just good information to go back to. Remember the big point that we're getting today and we got from preschoolers, it's not what you did, it's what you do before what you did. We always have a chance to go back and make some repairs in our relationships with the kids we take care of and our very own kids. So thank you, Denise, for all you've done for us. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to what the next steps look like in our mental health webinar series. And I'm going to say goodbye. No more questions, no more chats. Thank you.
Thank you very much.